I gave her everything. My time, my energy, my heart. I was never trying to replace her mother. I just wanted her to feel loved, to feel safe, to know that someone was always in her corner. Ivy wasn't just my stepdaughter. She was my daughter. From the moment she wrapped her little arms around my waist and called me Mama Elaine, I hoped I was enough. So when I heard what she said about me, it knocked the breath right out of my chest. She stole my future. Those were her exact words. She said it to her friends, loud enough that it got back to me, loud enough that her father didn't even bother denying it. And what made it worse was how confidently she said it, like it was fact, like the last 15 years meant nothing. Like all those nights I stayed up with her during flu season, all the birthday cakes I made from scratch, every time I showed up for her while her father was too busy working, none of it ever mattered. I sat at the edge of my bed, phone in hand, reading that message over and over again. It came from my sister Leona. Just one line. Elaine, Ivy's telling people you stole her future. Call me. I didn't call her back. I couldn't. I was too stunned to even cry. How could she say that? After everything? But the worst part wasn't the lie itself. It was knowing that deep down she believed it. That no matter how hard I tried, how much I gave, I had never really earned a place in her heart. I had spent years putting her needs before mine. I missed job opportunities, lost friends, even drifted from my own family. Also, I could raise her, nurture her, and make her feel whole after losing her mother. I didn't want applause. I just wanted to be loved back, or at the very least, seen. And now, she was telling the world that I was the villain in her story. What future did I steal? Was it the college scholarship I helped her apply for? The extracurriculars I drove her to every weekend? The savings I drained just to make sure she never felt like she was going without? Or was it the simple fact that I loved her like she was mine, when maybe she never wanted me to? I remember sitting there for what felt like hours, the air heavy and still. I kept trying to convince myself there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe someone twisted her words. Maybe she was angry about something else. Teenagers say cruel things, they lash out. But Ivy wasn't a child anymore. She was 19, old enough to know better, old enough to know exactly what she was doing. It wasn't just a random comment, it was a deliberate rejection. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized I had been living in an illusion that love alone was enough to bridge every gap. That if I just tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, loved enough, I could make her whole. I thought I had filled the cracks left by her mother's death, but maybe those cracks weren't mine to fix. Maybe she never wanted me to try. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, surrounded by the silence of a home I had helped build, and I wondered how a heart could feel this empty after giving so much away. That's where my story begins. Not with the adoption papers I never signed, not with the lullabies I sang to a grieving 5-year-old, not even with the man I married who stood by silently when his daughter erased me. It begins with a single sentence that shattered everything I thought I had. She stole my future. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more exciting stories. Before everything fell apart, I really believed we were a family. Not perfect, but real. The kind of family that was built through small moments. Lunchbox notes, rainy day movie nights, matching pajamas on Christmas morning. Ivy was 5 when I first met her. This tiny thing with tangled curls and eyes too old for her age. She clutched a stuffed rabbit like it was the only piece of her mother she had left. Her name was stitched across its ear. Bunny, in pink thread. I remember that first meeting like it was yesterday. Her father, Jeremy, had taken me to the park where Ivy liked to play. I was nervous, unsure if I should wave, speak, smile. What if she didn't like me? But then she ran up to him and he gently nudged her toward me. "This is Elaine," he said, crouching down beside her. "She's my friend." Ivy didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me with that deep, unreadable stare children have when they're deciding if you're safe. I squatted down to her level and said, "Hi, Ivy. I like your bunny." Her grip on it loosened just a little, and then, after a long pause, she whispered, "He's scared of strangers." I smiled. "That's okay, so am I." And that was the moment she let me in. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. Grief wrapped around that little girl like a second skin. She had tantrums, night terrors, sudden outbursts over the smallest things, spilled milk, mismatched socks, a balloon popping. But I didn't walk away. I sat with her through every storm. I read the same bedtime story every night for weeks. Goodnight Moon, until she finally let me tuck her in without crying. A year after that first meeting, Jeremy proposed. We married in the backyard under fairy lights, strung between the trees. Ivy wore a white dress with lace sleeves and called herself the Flower Queen. She clung to my side during the entire reception, and when we danced under the stars, she looked up at me and said, "I wish you were my real mommy." I almost cried right there. From that moment on, I raised her like she was mine. Not just legally, but emotionally. I enrolled her in ballet. I went to every parent-teacher conference. I taught her how to ride a bike, how to bake cookies, how to tie her shoes just right so they wouldn't come undone on the playground. Jeremy was there, but distant. He worked long hours and traveled often for his job. Sometimes I felt like a single mom in a married home, but I never complained. I saw it as my job to hold everything together. For Ivy, for us. Every year on Mother's Day, Ivy made me a handmade card. She'd leave it on my pillow and pretend it wasn't from her. I still have them all tucked inside a shoebox in my closet. My favorite was when she was 10. It read, "Thank you for loving me when I was hard to love. You're not my first mom, but you're my always mom." I held on to those words like they were sacred. I thought they meant something permanent. I thought we had a bond that couldn't be broken, no matter what. There were hard years, of course. Teenagers don't come with instructions. She got moody, distant, started hiding things, lying about where she was. But that's what teenagers do, right? I told myself it was normal, that she'd come back around, that all the love I had poured into her would be enough to carry us through. Looking back now, I realize how fragile that security really was. I was building our life like a house made of glass, thinking that love alone was strong enough to hold it all up. But underneath it, resentment was quietly growing. And I didn't see it. I was so sure we were okay. I was wrong. Because while I was looking at her like a daughter, she was starting to look at me like an obstacle. And that shift, it began long before I noticed. But by the time I did, the damage was already done. I think the first real crack showed up when Ivy turned 16. It had been a long year. Her grades had dipped, her moods came in sharp waves, and her room had become a fortress I wasn't allowed to enter without knocking twice and waiting for her approval. Still, I was determined to make her birthday feel special. I baked her favorite red velvet cake from scratch. I ordered decorations with her favorite quote from that movie she loved when she was little. "You are braver than you believe." I even splurged on a necklace, sterling silver, with her name etched on one side and a tiny heart on the other. I imagined us sitting at the kitchen table, blowing out candles, laughing, maybe even having one of those rare, quiet heart-to-hearts that teenage girls sometimes offer when they feel safe. But that moment never came. That morning, as I stood over the cake, carefully piping the last few swirls of frosting, Ivy walked into the kitchen with her phone in hand and said, without looking at me, "I'm going to Aunt Dana's for my birthday. She's taking me shopping." I paused. "Oh, I didn't know you had plans with Dana?" She shrugged. "She texted me last night. I tried to smile, keep it light. Well, I made your cake. Maybe we can have dinner together when you get back." She blinked slowly, then said, "We'll see. Depends how late we are." Then she turned and left. No thank you, no hug, no acknowledgement of the effort, just gone. I stood there, frosting bag still in hand, and watched the door swing shut behind her. I told myself not to take it personally. Teenagers pull away. It's part of growing up. She'd come around, she always did. But it wasn't just the abruptness that stung. It was the way she said Dana's name. Like that's who she saw as her safe place now. Like I had been quietly replaced. Ivy had always been close to Dana. her mother's sister. I had encouraged that bond for years, even though Dana and I had a strained relationship. She always treated me politely in public but coldly in private, like I was some interloper occupying a space I didn't earn. She never said it out loud, but the undertone was always there. You'll never be her mother. I felt it in every conversation we had. Later that night, I saw the pictures on social media. Ivy beaming in a new denim jacket, her arm draped around Dana's shoulder, shopping bags at her feet, Dana holding up a pink cupcake with 16 candles on top. The caption read, "Birthday magic with my girl #family first." That hashtag hit me like a punch to the chest. Family first. I zoomed in, looking for any hint that I'd been included, that I hadn't imagined my role in Ivy's life all these years. There was nothing. I closed my phone and sat at the kitchen table, where the cake still waited, untouched, candles still in the drawer. I stared at it until the frosting began to lose its shape under the warm kitchen lights. Jeremy came home an hour later. I told him what happened. He gave me a half-hearted, "She's a teenager, Elaine," and went straight to the living room to turn on the game. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a missed dinner or forgotten cake. This was something deeper, something shifting. Ivy wasn't just acting out. She was pulling away, redefining her circle, and I was no longer in it. I still remember the moment I scraped that untouched cake into the trash. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't cry. I just stood there, wiping each piece into the bin as quietly as I could. But inside, it felt like I was burying something much bigger than dessert. That night, I lay awake wondering how a girl I loved like my own could make me feel like a stranger in my own home. It was the first time I asked myself a question that would haunt me for months after. Am I the only one who thought we were still a family? After her 16th birthday, something in our house shifted. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in those quiet, invisible spaces where love usually lives. The hugs disappeared first, then the good nights, then her voice. Ivy began moving through our home like a guest with a suitcase packed in her heart. She'd come in, toss her shoes by the door, and vanish upstairs without a word. If I knocked, she'd answer with one-word replies. Fine. Busy. Later. I tried not to take it personally. I reminded myself that this was what teenagers do, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being shut out. I was being erased. I kept showing up anyway. I left her favorite snacks in the pantry. I offered rides to school, even when she ignored the question. I even waited up for her on the nights she went out with friends just to make sure she got home safe. Some nights she'd brush past me like I was part of the furniture. Other nights she'd glance at me and mutter, "You don't have to wait up, Elaine. You're not my mom." The first time she said that, "You're not my mom," I actually froze. She didn't yell it. She didn't spit it out like an insult. She said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like she was correcting a stranger who had mispronounced her name. I wanted to scream, to remind her of the time I held her for 4 hours straight when she had a fever of 103. Of the time I spent 2 weeks sewing her Halloween costume by hand. Of the night she got her period for the first time and called me from school. Not her dad, not her aunt, me. But I said nothing, because I knew that any reminder of those moments would just sound like begging. I began shrinking around the house. I cleaned without being asked. I tiptoed past her room so I wouldn't disturb her. I offered less advice, stopped suggesting family dinners, and deleted the Mom and Me playlist we used to sing to in the car. Every time I tried to reach out, she pulled back harder. Jeremy didn't help. He had always been more of a background father, but now he was practically a ghost. He worked late. He nodded through our conversations. He avoided conflict like it was a job requirement. When I tried to talk to him about Ivy, he said things like, "She's finding herself," or "Don't push too hard, she'll come around." But I wasn't pushing. I was barely even there anymore. One evening, I came home from work and found Ivy sitting at the dining table with Dana. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen her Anne in months, and certainly not in our home. They were laughing about something. When I stepped into the room, Dana turned to me and said, "Oh, Elaine, didn't know you'd be home so early." It wasn't the words. It was the tone, light, polite, and sharp as a knife. Ivy didn't even look up. I wanted to ask why I hadn't been told, why Dana felt comfortable walking into our home uninvited, why my place in this family felt so increasingly optional. But I just nodded and went upstairs. Later that night, I overheard them talking in the hallway. Dana was whispering, but I could still hear it. "She's not your real mom, sweetie. You don't owe her anything." My knees nearly gave out. I leaned against the doorframe, holding my breath, waiting, begging for Ivy to defend me, to say something, anything. But all I heard was the soft, defeated sound of her bedroom door closing. That moment, quiet, cruel, and so final, was when it really sunk in. She was no longer mine, and I had no idea how I'd lost her. The moment that broke me didn't happen behind closed doors. It happened in front of a dozen people I barely knew, but it might as well have been a stadium. It was Ivy's senior year, and she had been nominated for a leadership award at school. I found out about it from a neighbor, not from Ivy or Jeremy. "Congratulations," the woman had said at the grocery store. "You must be so proud of your daughter." I smiled and nodded, pretending I wasn't hearing it for the first time. When I brought it up at home, Ivy just blinked. "It's no big deal, it's just a school thing." But I showed up anyway. I bought a new dress, printed a copy of her nomination letter, and arrived early to the ceremony so I could get a good seat. I saved a spot beside me for Jeremy, but true to form, he texted last minute that he couldn't make it. Work emergency. So I sat alone in the third row, holding my little camcorder, heart pounding like I was the one being honored. When they called her name, I stood and clapped, louder than anyone else. Ivy walked up to the stage, poised and beautiful in a navy blue dress. For a second, I let myself believe maybe she'd glance toward me, maybe she'd smile or wave, or even just make eye contact. Something. But her eyes swept over me like I was a stranger. She gave a short speech, confident, well-rehearsed, full of gratitude. She thanked her teachers, her friends, even Dana, my mother's sister who's been like a second mom to me. And then paused. My heart leaned forward. She smiled and said, "And to the people who raised me, shaped me into who I am, thank you for showing me the kind of woman I never want to become." The room went quiet. A few people laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. I sat frozen, every cell in my body trying to make sense of what I had just heard. Then she moved on like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just gutted me with a single sentence. I don't remember the rest of the ceremony. I don't remember driving home. I barely remember putting the camcorder back in its case. But I do remember walking into the house, stepping into the kitchen and seeing Ivy's award certificate on the counter next to an uneaten sandwich. I stared at it for a long time, then turned and went to my room. I didn't cry, not at first. I just sat there in silence, playing the moment over in my head again and again, waiting for the sting to dull. It didn't. It kept tightening around my chest like a rope, pulling every breath a little harder than the last. When Jeremy came home later, I told him what happened. He leaned against the doorframe, rubbed his face, and said, "She's under a lot of pressure. You might be reading too much into it." Too much into it? I had been her mother in every way that mattered. I'd poured my soul into raising that girl. And now I was being treated like an example of failure, like a cautionary tale. That night, I cried for hours, quietly so no one would hear. I buried my face into my pillow and let years of swallowed pain finally surface. It wasn't just the humiliation of being publicly dismissed. It was the deep throbbing ache of realizing that even in the moments where she was supposed to shine, she wanted me erased from the picture. I wasn't just unwanted, I was unwelcome. And the more I clung to the idea that we still had something to salvage, the more I humiliated myself. Something inside me broke that night. Something small but vital. A thread that had held me together as a mother, a wife, a woman. It snapped. And I knew things would never be the same again. I didn't leave all at once. It was slow, like erosion. You don't always notice the cliffside collapsing until the ocean's already inside your living room. After the ceremony, I stopped trying so hard. I still cooked dinner, still washed the laundry, still folded Ivy's favorite hoodie and left it on the end of her bed, but something in me had shut down. I stopped asking questions. I stopped offering hugs. I stopped hoping. One evening, maybe a week later, Ivy came home with a few friends. I was sitting at the dining table going through old bills and medical records from my mother's estate. I'd had a headache all day, and I just wanted quiet. She brushed past me without saying a word. Her friends trailed behind, laughing loudly, tossing their shoes in the entryway like the house didn't belong to anyone. I looked up, managed a small smile, and said, "Hey girls, shoes in the closet, please." One of them rolled her eyes. Ivy didn't even acknowledge me. They walked upstairs like I didn't exist. A few minutes later, I heard the unmistakable sound of Ivy's voice, just loud enough to carry down the hallway. "She's just some woman my dad married. It's not like she's family. Just some woman." I stared at the stack of papers in front of me, my mother's signature looping across a will she had written years ago. My mother, who had never once doubted my love for Ivy. My mother, who used to tell me, "You may not have given her life, but you're the reason she has one." And yet, here I was, reduced to a stranger under my own roof. I don't know what came over me, but I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer where we kept spare keys. I pulled out the ring with the tiny pink heart-shaped tag, the one Ivy had picked out herself when she was 12. I slipped it into my pocket. I went upstairs, past her room where the laughter had already picked back up, and into the bedroom Jeremy and I once shared. He was already in bed, eyes on his phone. I stood in the doorway and said, "Jeremy, can we talk?" He barely looked up. "What's going on?" "I can't do this anymore," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were trembling. "I'm tired of feeling invisible. I'm tired of living with someone who hates me." He sighed like I was overreacting. "She's just a teenager. You're taking everything so personally." "No, Jeremy," I said, louder this time. "This isn't just about Ivy, it's about you. You've let her treat me like a stranger, and you've done nothing to stop it." He sat up now, annoyed. "What do you want me to do? Force her to love you?" "No," I said quietly, "but you could have reminded her who I was, what I gave. You could have stood up for me. You could have told her I mattered." He was silent, and in that silence, I knew I'd been right all along. I packed a small bag that night. Just a few changes of clothes, some toiletries, and a folder with important documents. I didn't touch the wedding photos. I didn't say goodbye. As I walked out, the house was completely still. No one stopped me. No one called out. The porch light flickered as I shut the door behind me, casting a long shadow across the driveway. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before turning the engine on. I expected to feel panic, regret, maybe even second thoughts. But instead, all I felt was emptiness. Not peace, not clarity, just the cold, aching silence of being done. I drove to my sister Leona's house 2 towns over. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me in and held me like she used to when we were kids. "You stayed longer than anyone else would have," she whispered. I nodded, because I knew she was right. I hadn't left because I was weak. I left because I had finally realized I was the only one fighting for a family that didn't exist anymore. The thing about rock bottom is that no one ever tells you how quiet it is. There's no crash, no dramatic breakdown. It's not a scream. It's a whisper you hear alone, late at night when everyone else's life keeps moving and yours feels like it stopped. At Leona's house, I slept in the guest room, the one with floral sheets and a small window that looked out over her overgrown backyard. I stared at that window a lot in the beginning. Morning, noon, night. It didn't matter. I'd just sit there, watching the wind move through her trees, wondering if my absence had made any difference in that house I left behind. Spoiler, it didn't. No one called, not Jeremy, not Ivy, not even a cold text saying, "Are you okay?" It was as if I'd evaporated. Leona tried to make it feel like a break, not a collapse. She brought me coffee every morning, made us toast, and talked about everything but the elephant in the room. I was grateful for that, for the way she knew I didn't need advice. I just needed space to grieve. And that's what it was. Grief. The grief of losing a child who wasn't biologically mine but had been mine in every other way. The grief of losing a marriage that had faded into a distant, cold business arrangement. The grief of losing myself somewhere in the years I spent being mom, wife, support system. Everything except Elaine. I was 52 years old, sitting in a borrowed bed, no job, no plan, and a heart that felt like it had been hollowed out and left echoing. Some days, I didn't get out of bed. Others, I did, but only to move from the bed to the kitchen and back again. I didn't shower unless Leona reminded me. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't return voicemails from the 2 friends who still checked in. I was embarrassed, ashamed. How do you explain to someone that the people you devoted your life to just stopped seeing you? One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the bathroom staring at my reflection for almost an hour, not crying, not even blinking, just staring. My face looked older, but not from time. It looked tired in a way makeup couldn't fix, like someone had dimmed the light inside me. That night, Leona came into the room and placed a tray beside me. Some soup, crackers, a glass of water. She sat at the edge of the bed and said softly, "I'm worried about you." I didn't look at her. I didn't have the energy to pretend. "You're not eating. You're not sleeping right. You haven't left this room in 3 days." I nodded slowly. I don't know who I am without them." She reached for my hand and squeezed it. "You were someone before them, Elaine, and you'll be someone after." Her words made something shift in me, but not all at once. Healing doesn't show up like a lightning bolt. It trickles in, like sunlight through heavy curtains. Still, there was no pretending. I was at my lowest, not because of where I was, but because of what I believed, that I had been replaceable, that all those years of love and sacrifice didn't matter, that I had given everything, and still ended up with nothing. I tried journaling again like I used to in college. The words came out jagged and bitter. One entry just said, "I was never enough." I stared at that sentence for a long time, wondering how long I had secretly believed it. But slowly, day by day, I started piecing myself together, not with big, heroic moments, just tiny ones. A shower without prompting, a walk around the block, a trip to the grocery store where I looked people in the eye again. No one knew the woman scanning produce had lost her entire identity 3 weeks ago, but I knew. And showing up still counted. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had silence. And while silence had broken me at first, it was also giving me space to think. That was rock bottom. Not fire, not fury, just the quiet truth that I had been living for other people for too long. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start living for me. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, quiet, gray, and forgettable in every other way. I was going through the last of my things from Jeremy's house. Leona had set a plastic storage bin by the door with a post-it that said, "Toss what you don't need, no rush." I almost didn't open it. Inside were a few old sweaters, some random receipts, a dusty jewelry box, and a stack of unopened mail Jeremy had forwarded weeks earlier. As I rifled through it, my fingers brushed something out of place. An envelope. Heavy. Cream-colored. No postage. No return address. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was elegant, careful, and on the front, in soft blue ink, it read, "For Ivy, to be given when she's ready." I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on birthday cards, photo albums, a few recipes still tucked into our kitchen drawer. It was Marla's. I stared at the envelope for what felt like hours. Her mother. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Guilt, curiosity, fear. My first instinct was to seal it back inside the bin. It wasn't mine to open. It was sacred. Private. A mother's final words to her daughter. But then I remembered something Jeremy had told me once, years ago, back when Ivy was still little. We were reorganizing the garage and came across a box of Marla's things. Jeremy picked it up, held it to his chest like it was made of glass, and said, "She wrote a letter for Ivy before she passed. Said I should hold on to it, give it to her when the time felt right." I'd forgotten all about that until now. Apparently, so had he. But now here it was. In my hands, unopened, unread, forgotten. I should have waited. I should have called Jeremy or even Dana. but something deep inside me, something maternal, something protective, told me I had to read it. Not for gossip, not to invade anyone's privacy, but because I needed to understand what had gone wrong, how I had gone from mom to nothing, how Ivy had come to believe I was the villain. I took a deep breath, slid my finger under the seal, and opened the envelope. It was a single page, handwritten, no smudges, no corrections. My sweet Ivy, if you're reading this, then I'm not there, and that breaks my heart more than words can say. I wanted to see you grow up, become the incredible woman I know you'll be. But if I can't be there, I want you to know something important. Don't let grief harden you. Don't let it turn you cold. It's okay to miss me. It's okay to be angry. But don't shut the world out. Don't shut out the people who try to love you, even if they're not me. I hope your dad finds someone who sees you the way I do, someone patient, kind, and steady. And if he does, Ivy, I want you to love her. I want you to know it's okay to let another woman hold your hand, brush your hair, sit in the audience at your school plays. It's okay to let her in. It doesn't mean you're replacing me. It just means your heart is big enough to hold more than one kind of love. And to that woman, if you're reading this, thank you. Thank you for loving my girl. Be gentle with her. Her grief will come out in strange ways, but underneath it all, she's still the little girl who clutched my necklace when she was scared. Please remind her she's not alone. With love always, Marla. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking. There it was. Validation I never thought I'd receive. Permission I never knew had been granted. Marla hadn't seen me as competition. She'd seen me as hope, as a bridge for her daughter to keep feeling safe in a world that had taken her mother too soon. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. I didn't know what I was going to do with the letter. I didn't know if I'd ever give it to Ivy. But in that moment, I finally knew the truth. I hadn't stolen anything. I had been chosen. Maybe not by Ivy, maybe not by Jeremy, but by the one woman whose voice still echoed in her daughter's heart. And that changed everything. Something shifted in me after I read that letter. It wasn't immediate. There was no cinematic swell of music, no rush of confidence, no tears cascading down my cheeks in revelation. It was quieter than that, more still, like the way sunlight gradually warms a cold room in the morning. I sat there for a long time, holding Marla's letter like it might vanish if I let go. Her words echoed in my mind on a loop. To that woman, thank you. Be gentle with her. It was the first time in a long time I felt seen, understood, not by the people around me, not even by Ivy, but by someone who'd left this world long before I entered theirs. Marla had entrusted me with something sacred, not just Ivy's care, but her heart. I had honored that, and yet I had allowed myself to forget it. I had allowed Ivy's silence to rewrite my story, Jeremy's indifference to convince me I didn't matter, Dana's coldness to strip me of my place. But that letter, it reminded me that I had been enough. I placed it gently back into the envelope, sealed it with a piece of tape, and tucked it into the back of my journal. I didn't know what I would do with it yet. All I knew was that it wasn't meant to stay buried in a bin of forgotten mail. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in weeks, I made coffee before Leona did. I opened the windows. I sat at the table with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper, and I began to write. Not about Ivy or Jeremy or what had happened to me. I wrote about what I wanted now. It was harder than I thought. What did I want? I'd spent so long building my life around other people's needs, I barely remembered my own. But something inside me whispered, start small. So I wrote down just one sentence. I want to feel like a whole person again. That was it. Not revenge, not reconciliation, just wholeness, just peace. That day, I took a walk. Not far, just around the block, but the sky felt different, lighter. The trees, the cracks in the pavement, the chirp of birds, everything felt like it had been waiting for me to return. I saw a flyer for a part-time opening at a local bookstore and snapped a photo of it. I hadn't worked in years, not since Ivy was 10, but the idea didn't terrify me like it used to. In fact, it sparked something. That night, I told Leona I was thinking of applying. Her smile said everything. "It's about time," she said. "You've been keeping your soul on layaway long enough." I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. In the days that followed, I continued to do small things. I donated half the clothes I never wore. I deleted contacts from my phone who hadn't checked on me since the split. I even rejoined a cooking group I'd abandoned years ago because Jeremy didn't like social obligations. Every step was small, but it was mine, and through it all, I kept returning to the letter. Not to reread it, but just to hold it. To remember that someone once trusted me with her daughter's life, and not because she had to, but because she believed I was worthy. That belief, it began to root itself in me, not as defiance, not as ego, but as quiet strength. Ivy might never see me the way I saw her. She might cling to her bitterness or let others twist her memories. But that no longer defined me. I had done right by her. I had been patient, kind, steady, exactly what Marla had asked me to be. And while that hadn't earned me the love I craved, it had earned me something just as important: self-respect. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. I didn't need to chase apologies that would never come. I didn't need to beg for a seat at a table I helped build. I was done shrinking. And though I wasn't sure what came next, I knew this for certain. I was no longer standing still. Rebuilding wasn't loud. It didn't come with grand declarations or sweeping gestures. It came in the form of quiet resolve, like learning to breathe again after holding it for too long. After weeks of silence, I finally picked up the phone and called the bookstore. A soft-spoken woman named Karen answered, and I told her I was calling about the part-time job. She asked if I had any retail experience. I said no, but I had years of managing a household, keeping a teenager alive and organizing chaos with a smile. She laughed. "That's better than half the resumes I've seen. Can you come in tomorrow?" I could have cried right then. Instead, I said, "Yes, absolutely." The next day, I put on a blouse I hadn't worn since before Ivy turned 15, ran a comb through my hair, and walked into that small, sunlit bookstore like I belonged. Karen welcomed me with a warm hug. "It's just shelving, helping customers, keeping things tidy," she said, "but we're a little family here." Family. The word stung, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. It felt distant. Like something I used to chase that no longer defined my worth. I started working 3 afternoons a week. The smell of old pages, the hum of soft music, the gentle rhythm of sorting and stacking. It all felt healing. People came in looking for stories, and somehow being around those stories reminded me that mine wasn't over. Meanwhile, I started making quiet moves. I opened a separate bank account. I changed the passwords on my email, unsubscribed from the joint ones Jeremy had access to. I sorted through old bills and looked into part-time online courses and financial literacy. Things I had let slide for years because Jeremy handled it. Not anymore. I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't even angry. What I was doing wasn't about them. It was about me reclaiming the pieces I had handed over so freely, thinking love meant surrender. I made a list of small goals. Get my own health insurance. Make a budget. Learn how to file taxes myself. Replace the wardrobe I'd stopped updating 10 years ago. Every time I crossed something off, I felt more like myself again. Not the version of me who used to beg Ivy to talk to her. Not the wife who waited for Jeremy to come home with crumbs of affection, but me, Elaine. A woman who was starting over, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Leona noticed the shift. "You're getting lighter," she said one evening as we sipped tea on her back porch. "You don't flinch when her name comes up anymore." I smiled. I think I finally realized I don't need closure from them. I needed it from myself. And it was true. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. I wasn't rehearsing arguments or rewriting the past. I was too busy planting seeds for the life ahead of me. Still, there was one thing I hadn't decided on: the letter. Marla's words sat tucked safely in the back of my journal. I hadn't shown it to anyone. Part of me still wondered if Ivy even deserved to see it, after everything she'd said. But another part of me, a deeper, quieter part, knew it wasn't about deserving. It was about truth. And if there was ever going to be healing, that truth had to come to light. So I made a plan. I wouldn't send it right away. I would wait for the right moment, and when it came, I'd do it with the same calm, quiet dignity I had tried to live by all those years. No confrontation, no drama, just truth, delivered gently, like Marla intended. Until then, I continued building, quietly, privately, intentionally. I had learned my lesson. Real power doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need applause or acknowledgement. Real power is silent. It's steady. It shows up in the form of a woman who was once erased, now rewriting herself in bold, unshakable ink. It didn't happen all at once. But one by one, the people who had once dismissed me started to feel the difference my absence made. At first, it was subtle. Ivy reached out to Leona through a social media message. She asked if I was okay. Not out of concern exactly, more like curiosity. I haven't heard from her. I figured she might have come crawling back by now. That word, crawling. Leona didn't respond right away. When she finally did, all she wrote was, "Elaine's not crawling. She's rising." That was it. I didn't know Leona had said that until Ivy screenshotted it and sent it directly to me. No greeting. No how are you. Just the image. I stared at it for a while. There was no apology, no acknowledgement. Just her subtle way of checking if the woman she erased still existed. I didn't reply. That silence, that choice to not respond, was the first time I felt real power in months. Meanwhile, Jeremy started to unravel in small ways. I hadn't blocked him, but I also hadn't spoken to him since I walked out. I heard from mutual friends that the house was falling apart. Bills unpaid. Ivy hadn't come home in weeks. She'd been spending most of her time with Dana. The laundry piled up, the fridge sat nearly empty, and no one remembered the last time a real meal had been cooked. Jeremy, it turned out, had never learned how to live without someone holding everything together. I also heard he called my old friend Marcy, someone we used to double date with before she and her husband moved out of state. He told her, "I think I made a mistake. I think she's really not coming back." When she relayed that to me, I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel satisfaction. I just felt free. I had spent so long blaming myself for being unseen, but now that I was gone, the absence was loud. And that silence, that lack, was doing what my presence never could. It was making them realize what I had truly given. Not just chores and cooking and caretaking. I had given stability, warmth, emotional labor. And once it was gone, the emptiness spoke volumes. Back at the bookstore, Karen asked if I wanted to take on a few more hours. I said yes without hesitation. I had begun building something of my own. Small maybe, but real. My coworkers became a second kind of family. Not one bound by blood or duty, but by shared space, kindness, and mutual respect. They didn't know my full story. I hadn't told them. But they knew enough to treat me like someone who mattered. One day, a teenage girl came in with her mother, arguing softly about a required summer reading list. The girl rolled her eyes and said, "It's just stupid books, Mom." Her mother looked exhausted. I remembered that look. I had that look for years. I smiled gently and said, "Hey, I used to think that too. But one day, one of those books made me feel less alone. Just give it a chance. You never know." The girl shrugged, but she picked one out anyway. After they left, Karen leaned over and whispered, "You're really good at this, you know?" I nodded, swallowing the emotion that rose unexpectedly in my throat. Because I was good at showing up, at offering gentleness where there was resistance, at staying soft in a world that had tried to harden me. And now, I was finally offering that softness to myself. Back at home, what used to be my home, things continued to fray. Ivy posted something cryptic on social media. Some people pretend to love you just to feel good about themselves. It stung, but not like it used to. I no longer took it personally, because Ivy was still searching, still trying to rewrite her past to make sense of her pain. She didn't know yet that healing doesn't come from blame. It comes from truth, and truth was quietly catching up to her. I waited until I was fully sure, not angry, not grieving, not fragile, just still and steady. The letter had stayed tucked away for weeks. Every so often I would take it out, read Marla's words again, and ask myself the same question. Is Ivy ready? And finally, one morning, I stopped asking whether she was ready and asked whether I was. I didn't deliver it in person. That wasn't the kind of conversation Ivy and I were built for anymore. I wrote a simple note, folded it with care, and tucked it inside the envelope along with Marla's letter. My note read, Ivy, I know you may not want to hear from me, and that's okay, but this letter wasn't written by me. It was written by someone who loved you before either of us knew how to explain what love meant. I was never here to replace her, just to honor her. Elaine. I mailed it, no return address, no message beforehand. Then I waited. I didn't check my phone obsessively, I didn't pace, I didn't hope. I simply went on with my day. My work at the bookstore, my evening tea with Leona, my quiet time with myself. I had already made peace. This wasn't about reclaiming a relationship. It was about returning a truth that had been lost. 3 days later, I got the message. It came from Ivy's number. Short, bare. Did you read it? I stared at the screen. My pulse didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I typed back, yes. There was a pause. Then, you weren't supposed to. I waited, then replied, I didn't plan to, but it found me. And I think in a way it was always meant to. Another pause. Then, I didn't know she felt that way. No one told me. Why didn't he show it to me? I didn't answer that. Because I couldn't. Because I didn't want to turn this into blame. Not toward Jeremy. Not toward anyone. It wasn't about who failed. It was about who was ready now. So I simply said, I'm glad you know now. There was no reply after that, and that was okay. The reveal wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. And in that quiet exchange, something long buried had been unearthed. The ghost between us had finally spoken. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. Official stationery, gold embossed at the top. My name printed clearly on the front. It was from the school board. Ivy had been nominated for a youth scholarship the previous year, a prestigious one. Part of her application included community service work, an essay about overcoming personal challenges, and letters of recommendation. One of those letters had been written by me. I had forgotten about it. It was a heartfelt letter, before the collapse, before the coldness. In it, I wrote about Ivy's resilience, her strength, and how she had overcome the loss of her mother. I'd even mentioned my role, lightly, how I'd tried to give her the love she deserved. Apparently, that letter had been flagged. Someone had anonymously questioned the authenticity of her application, claiming the narrative was misleading. The board reached out to me to clarify. They sent me a copy of her submitted essay. It was fiction. Beautifully written, but entirely fictional. It painted me as a controlling figure who discouraged Ivy from pursuing her dreams, claimed I withheld opportunities, manipulated her choices, even mocked her ambitions. I sat in stunned silence, the pages trembling in my hand. This wasn't just exaggeration. It was a total reinvention of our life together. For a long time, I didn't know what to do. Then I wrote the board back, not with accusations, not to ruin Ivy's chances, but with truth. I included a copy of Marla's letter. I told them, I don't want to damage her future, I just want to protect my name. Please make your decision based on honesty, not resentment. I sent it off without telling Leona, without telling anyone. 2 weeks later, Ivy's name was removed from the finalist list. She posted something on social media that night. Some stories fall apart when the truth gets told. That doesn't mean they weren't real to us. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing she'd ever written to one. And for once, I didn't feel hurt. I felt vindicated. Not because she lost, but because I finally stood up for the truth, for myself, for the story no one else wanted to tell. Here are the next 2 expanded sections, rich in emotional depth and closure. A month passed. Then, too, the bookstore became my rhythm, my sanctuary. I spent mornings cataloging, afternoons recommending novels to regulars, evenings sipping tea and journaling by the window. It wasn't dramatic or glamorous, but it was asterisk mine asterisk. Then one rainy afternoon, I got another message. This time not from Ivy. It was from Jeremy. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. It had no punctuation, no context, no apology. I didn't answer, not right away. A few days later, he showed up. Leona opened the door while I was still folding laundry. "Elaine," she called softly. "He's here." I stepped into the hallway and saw him standing there. Older, tired, smaller than I remembered. It was strange, seeing him not as my husband, but as a man who once knew a version of me I no longer was. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if he had the right to. "I didn't know about the letter," he said softly. "I thought I lost it. I didn't think it mattered." I nodded. "It mattered." He looked down at his shoes. "Ivy, she's been asking about you. She's confused, hurt. She won't say it, but I think she regrets how things went." I leaned against the doorway, arms folded, not in anger, but in boundary. "She doesn't have to regret it," I said. "She just has to sit with the truth." He hesitated. "Would you ever be open to talking to her?" I took a long breath. "I'm open to listening, I said. "But I'm not stepping back into the role she pushed me out of. I'm not there to fix what she broke." He looked at me then, really looked, and I could tell he finally understood. Not just the pain I had carried, but the strength I had grown into. He nodded. "You look good," he said. "Different, stronger." "I am." That night, Ivy messaged me again. I read it again. Her letter. "She believed in you. I didn't." There was no request to meet, no direct apology, just those words. And for once, it was enough. Because I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't clinging or hoping or replaying old wounds in my head like they held the key to my worth. I had already found what I needed. Some people wait for closure like it's a door someone else has to open. But what I've learned is that sometimes you are the one holding the key. I didn't get the movie ending. Ivy didn't rush back into my arms. There was no teary reunion, no grand apology under pouring rain. And honestly, I don't need that anymore. What I have now is better. I have peace. I have a quiet home with a well-worn reading chair by the window. I have shelves of books and a paycheck that I earned on my own. I have tea that tastes better when no one is yelling in the background. I have a sister who shows up, a cat named Milo who thinks I'm the most important person in the world, and I have a heart that's finally stopped apologizing for breaking. Every now and then, I still think of Ivy. I wonder if she ever rereads Marla's letter late at night. I wonder if she thinks of the woman who stood by her through scraped knees, first crushes and silent tantrums. But I don't wonder if I mattered. I know I did, because I was there. When no one else showed up, I did, again and again, with open arms and steady hands. I was never just a stepmother. I was a constant. I was love. I was home. And even if she never says it, she knows that. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need to be spoken loudly. It doesn't need to be believed by everyone. It just needs to be held close by the person it belongs to. And this truth is mine. I didn't steal her future. I saved her from losing it. And in doing so, I finally found my own.